Hello and welcome to the video. It's Matthew and we're looking at question 10, which is worth 50 marks. So we're told that Keith plays hurling and he hits the ball with his hurl. The height of the ball is modelled by this quadratic function here. And then we're asked in question A part 1 to work out how high the ball was when it was hit. So the moment the ball is hit, that's when t is equal to 0. And t is the seconds after the ball was hit. So of course, when the ball is hit, no seconds have passed, so therefore t is equal to 0. So we're basically told what we have to do here in this question. You won't always be told to put t equal to 0 for the initial value, but we are here, which is great. So let's just put 0 into the quadratic function we got at the top. So we're just putting in 0 wherever we have t. That's going to give us h is 0, which is the height of the ball when it was hit. So 0 squared is obviously 0. So 0 to the power of anything is always going to be 0. And 0 multiplied by anything is also always going to be 0. So that means the minus 2 by 0 squared will be 0. And 5 by 0 will also be 0. So that means we'll just be left with 1.2. So when t is equal to 0, the height of the ball is equal to 1.2 meters. So that means the height of the ball 0 seconds after being hit is 1.2 meters. So in other words, the ball was 1.2 meters when it was hit. So basically when Keith was holding the ball in his hand, when he hit it, it was 1.2 meters above the ground. So that's A part 1, which was worth 5 marks. Now let's have a look at A part 2. So here we're told that the ball was caught after 2.4 seconds. And now we're asked to work out how high the ball was when it was caught. So we're told it's been caught after 2.4 seconds. So now that means that we're going to have to put t equal to 2.4 in the equation. So remember, t represents time. So after 2.4 seconds, we're just going to put in 2.4 for t and work out the function. So we can work this out on our calculator. So minus 2 multiplied by 2.4 squared. And make sure to put the 2.4 in brackets and then the squared just on the 2.4 like this. And the squared button is up at the top here. It's the x to the power of 2. That means you want to square whatever you have on the calculator. And then plus 5 by 2.4 plus 1.2. So we're just putting in 2.4 wherever we have t. I have it into my calculator now. And I'm just going to click equal to. And that gives us 42/25. However, I'm going to change that to decimals, and you can do that by clicking the S to D button right here. And that gives us 1.68 meters. So that means when the ball was caught after 2.4 seconds, the ball was 1.68 meters in the air. So that's my answer for A part 2, which was also worth 5 marks. Now let's have a look at A part 3. So this question is slightly harder. It's telling us that when the ball passed the halfway line, it was 3.2 meters in height. But the height was decreasing, so that's going to be important for the answer. So we're asked how many seconds after it was hit did the ball pass over the halfway line? And then we're given a reminder of what the quadratic function is. So now this time we're given the height, we aren't given the time. So I'm going to explain something now, right? In the previous two parts of the question, we had the time and we had to work out the height. So when you have the time, you put the value in for t, so whatever the time is, you just put that time in for t, and the answer you get will be the height. However, this time we have the answer, if you like, we have the height, and we're going to have to work backwards. So we're reminded that the function is minus 2 t squared plus 5t plus 1.2. So let's write that out first of all. Now in this case, we don't know what t is, but we do know what the answer should be. So the answer for this should be equal to 3.2 meters. So in other words, this function is going to be equal to 3.2. I'm getting that from up here. So now we just have to solve this equation. And at the end of it, we should get t is equal to some number. And that number will be our answer. We might also get t is equal to 2 values. And we're going to have to choose whichever answer is the correct answer. And I'll talk you through that at the end of the question. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the 3.2 over to the left-hand side. So moving the 3.2 over to the left-hand side, across the equals to sign, we'll change it from plus 3.2 to minus 3.2. And I'm going to explain now why in a second. You'll probably see, and you'll probably notice why I've done that. Because now I can do 1.2 minus 3.2, and I'm only left with 3 terms as opposed to the 4 terms I had in the first line there. That gives me minus 2t squared plus 5t, and then 1.2 minus 3.2 is just minus 2. And at this stage now, minus 2t squared plus 5t minus 2, we only have 3 terms. One of them has a variable squared, that's the t squared. One of them has just a variable, which is just the t here. And then one is a constant without any t. So that means this, at this stage, this is a quadratic trinomial. You may know it as a quadratic equation. A quadratic trinomial is just a bit more accurate because it has 3 terms, but both of them are correct. So to solve a quadratic trinomial, we're going to use the guide number method. Now, you might have your own preferred way of solving quadratic trinomials. This is my preferred method, and I think it's the most straightforward method with 5 simple steps. And if you know those 5 steps, it will work for you. But of course, if you have your own way, please feel free to use that, and we should both get the same answers. So let's give it a go. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to get the minus 2t squared. I want the first term there, the number before the t squared, to be positive, as it'll just make the next step easier. So I'm going to multiply everything by minus 1, so that the minus 2t squared will become positive. I also have to multiply both sides by minus 1, so I've just written 0 by minus 1, but of course 0 by minus 1 will still be 0, but I'm just going to write it for sake of completeness. So minus 1 by minus 2t squared is plus 2t squared, minus 5t plus 2. And as I said, 0 by minus 1 is still going to be 0, as anything by 0 is 0. Now, the guide number method, if you haven't done this before and you want to see what it's like, please do follow along and do it along with me. I'll be explaining it in steps. So the first step is to multiply the number before the t squared. So to multiply the coefficient, which is the number before the t squared, by the constant. So that's by the number without any t. So in our case here, that's 2 by 2. So 2 by 2 gives us 4. So that's the first step done. So multiply the number before the t squared by the number without any t. Now, of course, sometimes it'll be x's or y's, but it's the same principle. The number before whatever is squared by the number without any letter, without any variable. So once you get the 4, then you want to get the factor pairs of 4. So the factor pair is essentially just, for example, for 4, we have 2 factor pairs. We have 4 by 1, and we have 2 by 2. Now, you want to pick the factor pair that will give you the number in the middle. Now, when I say the number in the middle, I mean the number before just the t, not the t squared, and not the number without a t, the number before just the t. So the coefficient of the t, which is this number right here, minus 5. So which of these, either 4 and 1 or 2 and 2, could give us minus 5? So you can do plus plus, so you can do 2 plus 2, you can do 2 minus 2, you can do minus 2 minus 2, whatever combination of pluses and minuses you want. You can only use plus and minus, but it must equal minus 5. So of course 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 minus 2 is 0, and minus 2 is minus 4, so it's not the 2 by 2. How about the 4 and 1? So plus 4 plus 1 is 5. So this is a common mistake. Plus 4 plus 1 is 5. However, we want minus 5, okay? We don't want plus 5, so we can't do that. 4 minus 1 is 3, so it's not 4 minus 1. 1 minus 4 is minus 3, so it can't be 1 minus 4. The other one is minus 4 minus 1. And minus 4 minus 1 is indeed minus 5. So we're going to rewrite the equation with the 4 and the 1. So I'm going to rewrite that as 2t squared minus 4t minus 1t plus 2 is equal to 0. Now that's the exact same equation. The minus 4t minus 1t in the middle, that's the same thing as minus 5t, because minus 4t minus 1t is minus 5t. So I haven't changed the equation, I've just rewritten it slightly, but it equals the same thing. However, now I can do grouping, as we have 4 terms. And there are 4 terms that you'll be able to factorize the first group and the second group, and then you'll get your answer at the end. So factorizing by grouping, you split up the 4 terms into 2 separate groups of 2 terms. So my first group is going to be the 2t squared minus 4t, and my second group will be the minus 1t plus 2. I'm going to factorize both of those, which is the highest common factor method. So the highest common factor of 2t squared minus 4t is going to be 2t. And then you're going to divide 2t into 2t squared and minus 4t. So if you find that tricky, you can just do, what do you multiply by 2t to get 2t squared? And of course, to get 2t squared from 2t, you have to multiply it by t. So then you'll have a t in there. And then we can do the same thing with the minus 4t. So what do you multiply by 2t to get minus 4t? And the answer is, of course, minus 2. Now we're going to have another bracket over here on this side. And we should have the same thing in both brackets if we're right. But before we do that, we need to work out the highest common factor of minus 1t plus 2. So there's no real highest common factor apart from minus 1. So we'll just put down minus 1. And minus 1 into minus 1t is just going to be t, because minus 1 by t will be minus 1t. And then minus 1 into plus 2, you can do this on the calculator as it's two constants, is going to be indeed minus 2. And that's still equal to 0. So now, as you can see, we do have the same thing in both brackets, t minus 2. And I can rewrite that as 2t minus 1 by t minus 2, and that's all equal to 0. So at this stage now, I can separate up the brackets into two separate equations. So I have 2t minus 1 is equal to 0, and t minus 2 is equal to 0. So 2t minus 1 is equal to 0. We have to solve for t here, and also on the t minus 2 one. So 2t minus 1 is equal to 0. So that's going to be, I'm going to move the minus 1 across, and that becomes 2t is equal to 1. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to get rid of the 2 before the t here. As when you have a number before the t, when you just want the t, you can just divide both sides by that number to get your answer. So 2t divided by 2 will be just t, and then 1 divided by 2 will be a half. And if you're not sure about that, you can check that on your calculator. On the right hand side, it's a bit easier. We get t minus 2 is equal to 0, so I'm just going to move the minus 2 across to the right hand side. So if t minus 2 is equal to 0, I can say that t is going to be equal to plus 2. As remember, when you move a number across an equals to sign, the symbol changes from either plus to minus or minus to plus. So then we get t is equal to 2. Now we have two answers here, either t is equal to a half or t is equal to 2. However, remember at the start we were told that when the height is decreasing, so that means when the ball is going down. So it's going to be at a height of 3.2 meters twice, once when it's going up the way, and then once when it's going back down. So we have two answers. We got t is equal to a half a second and t is equal to 2 seconds. So we need to pick out now which is the actual answer. But remember, we were told at the start of the question that it's when the height is decreasing, not when the height is increasing. If we think of it, the ball is going to be hit from somewhere around here, and it's going up, up, and then back down. It has to come back down, of course. So it's going to be at a height of 3.2 meters twice. We'll just say this is 3.2 meters here. So one of these values here is going to be a half, and the other is going to be 2. So of course, the first one is going to be the half value, the other is going to be 2. So which is the answer we're looking for? Well, it's telling us that we want it when the height is decreasing, which I've highlighted up at the top. So it's going to be decreasing here as the height is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller all the way down to 0. So that means it must be the 2. So after 2 seconds, the height is 3.2 meters and it's decreasing. So the answer is 2. So that's the answer for A part 3, and that was worth 10 marks. Don't forget your units, and then the answer is 2 seconds. So now let's have a look at A part 4, and this wants us to find dH/dt, so in other words the first derivative, and then it also wants us to find how long it took the ball to reach its greatest height. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work out what h is, and h is minus 2t squared plus 5t plus 1.2, and we're told that at the start of the question, and now I'm going to have to differentiate it. So before I differentiate it, I'm going to just talk you through how differentiation works. Of course, if you're okay with differentiation, you can always skip this explanation and just go on to the answer, which is completely fine. But for those of you might feel that differentiation is that bit harder, I'm going to just talk through how it works now. So when you get your term, we'll just say the term is x squared. If you want to differentiate that, you're going to bring the power to the front. So in other words, the power on this one here is the 2. So you're going to bring the 2 to the front. That's going to become 2x. But you also must reduce the power by 1 now. So that's going to be 2 minus 1. So that's going to be, so you've brought the 2 to the front, so it's now 2x. The power was 2, it was x squared, but you're now going to reduce the power by 1. So 2 minus 1 is just 1. So that's 2x to the power of 1. And just so you know, 2x to the power of 1 is the same thing as just 2x. We don't normally write it when it's to the power of 1, but if you find that it helps you to write it to the power of 1, please do. You will not get penalized. Now, just the other case could be when you have a number before the x. So in other words here, it could be 3x, for example. So we'll say it's 3x squared. This time, you're going to bring the 2 to the front, but you're going to have to multiply it by the 3. So if there's a number before the x, you're going to have to multiply that by whatever the power is when you bring the power down. So you don't plus it or minus it or divide it. It's you multiply whatever number is before the x by the power. So in our case here, that's 3 by 2. And once again, you reduce the power by 1. So it's going to be 3 by 2x, and then the power was 2, and you're reducing it by 1, so the power is now 1. So 3 by 2 is 6. So it's 6x to the power of 1, or just 6x, whichever one you want to write is completely fine. So I used x in my example here, but we have t in our question. Both are completely fine, but just x is the variable in the example and t is the variable in the actual question. So let's give it a go now. So the first term is minus 2t squared. So I'm going to bring the 2 to the front and multiply it by minus 2t. And then I'm going to reduce the power on the t by 1. So it was t to the power of 2. It's now just going to be t to the power of 1, as 2 minus 1 is obviously 1. So then I'm left with 2 by minus 2t. And the next term now is the plus 5t. So I'm just going to do this as an example over here again. For example, if the power on the x at the start is just going to be 1. So for example, we'll just say 2x. Now not 2x squared or 2x cubed, just 2x. That's really, as I explained before, 2x to the power of 1. So once again, you bring the 1 to the front and you're going to multiply it by the 2. But of course, 1 by anything is just going to be whatever it is you're multiplying it by. That's going to be just 1 by 2. And of course, we still have the x. However, this time now you're going to be reducing the power on the x by 1 again. But 1 minus 1 is obviously 0, so it's x to the power of 0. Now, anything at all to the power of 0 is 1. So you can put any number you want into the calculator and put it to the power of 0, and you should get 1. The only number that this won't work for is actually 0, ironically enough. So you can't do 0 to the power of 0, but any other number to the power of 0 is 1. So it could be 5 million, could be 2,516, or simply just 4 to the power of 0. It's always going to be 1. So that means this x to the power of 0 over here is just 1. So that means we really have 1 by 2 by 1, which is obviously just going to be 2. So in other words, when you differentiate a term with just an x, and it's not x squared or x cubed or anything, when it's just x, the derivative is just the number before the x. So in our case here, we have plus 5t, so the derivative of that is just going to be 5. And then we finally have 1 plus 2, and whenever you differentiate a constant, and when I say constant, I mean a number without an x or a t or whatever the variable is, a number without any variable, it just goes to 0, okay? No matter what the variable is, no matter what the constant is, if it hasn't got a variable with it, when you differentiate it, it will go to 0. You can write plus 0 if you want, but there's no need. I'm just simply going to leave it out. So we get 2 by minus 2t plus 5. So 2 by minus 2t is minus 4t, and we still have the plus 5. So that means dht is minus 4t plus 5. So now we have to work out how long it took the ball to reach its greatest height. So that's another word for that would be the maximum height. And I'm going to give you a formula now for the maximum value of something. So for the maximum value, you get the derivative, which we have, which is dht, and put the derivative equal to 0. So we already have dht, put that equal to 0, and then solve for the variable. So the variable in our case here is going to be the t up here. So you have to put minus 4t plus 5 equal to 0, and then solve for t. So the first thing to do is to move the plus 5 over to the right-hand side of the equals to sign. So that becomes minus 4t is equal to minus 5. Now we don't want minus 4t, we just want t. So I'm going to divide both sides by minus 4. And that should get rid of the minus 4 on the left-hand side. So minus 4t divided by minus 4 is just t. And then minus 5 divided by minus 4 is going to be minus 5 over minus 4. And minus 5 over minus 4, so we've both minuses which will cancel out. So we're left with 5 over 4. And if we put 5 over 4 into our calculator, click equals to, and then change it from a fraction to a decimal with the S to D button over here, we see that that's equal to 1.25 seconds. So that means it took 1.25 seconds for the ball to reach its maximum height. So that's our answer for A part 4, which is worth 10 marks. Now let's have a look at part B. So part B is very wordy and there's a lot of words here, so let's read through it carefully. So Keith hits the ball again later in the game. So this time the height of the ball is modelled by a different quadratic function. And we're told that the ball was 1 meter high when Keith hit it. Its greatest height was 5 meters, which it reached after 2 seconds, and then it hit the ground without being caught. So we have to write down the coordinates of 3 points that must be on the graph, and then draw in the graph on the axes below. So first of all, let's have a look at the axes below. So we're told that the x value is the time in seconds after the ball had been hit. So this is x values, and this is important for the coordinates. And then the height, which is in k of t meters, is going to be the y values. So once again, that's important for the coordinates. So now let's read these three sentences again. These ones here are the important ones. So the first one, the ball was 1 meter high when Keith hit it. And remember, the x values, that's the time after the ball had been hit. So when Keith hits it, the time is like 0 seconds have passed after it's been hit because it hasn't actually traveled yet. So when the ball is hit first, t is equal to 0 because t seconds have passed after the ball has been hit because it's just literally been hit right then. So that means when the ball is hit, the t is equal to 0. So the x value essentially is 0. And remember, in a coordinate, the x value is always the first value. Just think of the alphabet. And the y value is second. So it was 1 meter high when he hit it. That means the y value is going to be 1, as it was 1 meter when it was hit. So this is basically saying after 0 seconds, the height is 1 meter. Now let's try the second sentence. And we're told that the greatest height was 5 meters, which it reached after 2 seconds. So this time, our x value is going to be 2, as 2 seconds have passed since it was hit, and it reached a height of 5 meters at that time, which was 2 seconds. So the second coordinate is 2, 5. Now this third one is probably the hardest coordinate to get. The first two are straightforward enough from the first two sentences, but the third one is that bit harder. So it hit the ground without being caught. That's not really giving us much information, to be honest. However, we can work it out. If the ball was 1 meter high when it was hit, its greatest height was 5 meters, which it reached after 2 seconds. So it went from 1 meter to 5 meters in 2 seconds. That was a rise of 4 meters in 2 seconds. So that means it's also going to fall 4 meters in the next 2 seconds, because we do know that 5 meters was its greatest height. So it's going to go up and then come back down after 5 meters. Think of it like a curve like this, a U shape. And I'll draw the curve properly in a few minutes. But this was its greatest height up here, and we'll say height is equal to 5. Let's say this is when it left his hand at 1 meter. So if it took 4 meters, if it took 2 seconds for him to go from 1 to 5, it will also take 2 seconds for it to fall back down to 1. So that means after 4 seconds, it's going to have gone back down to 1, which means our last coordinate is 4, 1. As after 2 seconds, it was at its highest, so it took 2 seconds to go from 1 to 5. It's also going to fall then, and in the next 2 seconds, it'll go from 5 back down to 1, in the same length of time. So we're going from 0 to 2 to 4. So then we have our 3 coordinates. Now let's plot these and draw in our graph. So the graph just on the screen there was a rough sketch and it wasn't the actual answer, but I am going to draw in the actual proper graph now. So let's plot the 3 points now. So 0, 1, 2, 5, and finally 4, 1. So remembering that the first value is the x value and the second value is the y value. So now let's draw in our curve. And your curve will look something like that. Now yours is going to be a bit more accurate on the paper. It's just quite hard to draw on the screen here, but it should look something similar to that. And we're going to label the function with the name y is equal to k of t, because that's what we're told it's called at the start of the question. So part B was worth 10 marks. Now let's have a look at part C. So C part 1, we're told that Keith buys a new hurl. It usually costs €33, but he's got a student discount of 15%. So we're asked to work out how much Keith actually paid for the hurl. So we have to work out how much of a discount he got. We know it was 15%, but what is 15% of 33? So normally it's 33, and we're going to find 15% of that now. And we can do that on our calculator. So 33 multiplied by, and then type in 15. And to get the percentage sign, click Shift, and then click the answer button with the yellow percentage sign above it. And you get 33 by 15%. And you get 99 over 20. But we want that as a decimal, not as a fraction. That's equal to 4.95. So that means his discount is €4.95. So it normally costs €33, but he's now got a discount of €4.95. So to find out the price he actually pays, we're going to do 33 minus 4.95. We can do that on this again. And 33 minus 4.95 is 561 over 20. But once again, we're going to click S to D to change it to a decimal. And we find that it's actually equal to 28.05, meaning that Keith actually paid €28.05 for the hurl. So that's our answer for C part 1, which is worth 5 marks. Now let's have a look at the final part of the question, C part 2, and we're told that Keith also buys a jersey. it costs $49.50, which includes VAT of 23%, and we're asked to work out how much VAT is on the jersey. So it costs $49.50. Now that includes VAT of 23%, so that means it includes 100% of the cost price, which is the price that it would sell for if it didn't have VAT, plus the extra 23% VAT. So VAT stands for value added tax, and it's a tax of normally 23% or around 23% on goods that you buy in shops. Some sectors like hospitality pay a slightly cheaper rate of VAT, and some things there's no VAT on at all, like children's books or children's shoes. However, most things you will be paying VAT on, so when you go into your shop, you will probably be paying VAT on goods that you buy in there. So in this case, the jersey had 23% VAT, so that means that the $49.50 included the price before the VAT was added, and also the extra 23% VAT that will be paid to the government. So when you're working out VAT, the shop picks a price for the good based on how much it costs them to buy, and then it must also add on the extra 23% VAT that it pays to the government on the good. So let's work out how much VAT was paid on this. So $49.50 is the 100% price plus 23% VAT. So that means it's equal to 123% in total of the price. And we're trying to work out what 23% is. So the quickest way to do that is to work out what 1% is first. And if we go what 1% is, we can multiply it by 23, as of course we're trying to get 23%, which is the VAT. So to get 1%, I'm going to divide 49.5 by 123. And we can do that on the calculator. So 49.5. You can write 0.50 if you want, but 0.5 and 0.50 is the same thing really. Over 123. And that gives us 33 over 82. But as a decimal, that's equal to 0.402439. So that means 1% is 0.4024. But of course, I don't want 1%, I want 23%. So obviously, to get 23%, we have what 1% is. So we're going to need that 23 times. So I'm just going to multiply 1% by the 23, and that will give me what 23% is equal to. So I can just do answer by 23. And I get 759 over 82. And once again, I'm going to change this to a decimal. And I get 9.256097. So I wanted the answer correct to the nearest cent. And obviously in cents, that's at 2 decimal places. So you know when you're in a shop, it's like 1999, so 19.99. You never see point and then more than 2 numbers when you're buying something in the shop. So I want 9.2, and then this 5, the third number there, the 5, is going to go up to 6, as the number after the 5 is 6, which is bigger than 5, which means that we're going to round the 5 up to 6, so it's going to be €9.26. So that's the amount of VAT that Keats paid on the jersey, €9.26. So that's my answer for C part 2, which was worth 5 marks. That's the final part of this question and also the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I helped.